Hi, this is Tamara at mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Essential Baby Sweater, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Please go to the link in the description. There you will find both the right and left-handed video tutorials, a link to the written pattern, and links to all the supplies you need. To make this pattern, you'll need Red Heart Soft Essentials Baby, and you can see here that I used 3 different colorways, a solid bluish aqua color, the solid white, and a variegated. You will need less than 1 skein of each of these to complete this sweater. In addition to the yarn, you will of course need a crochet hook. This one is a USJ 6mm by Furls. You'll also need your standard crochet supplies like stitch markers and tapestry needle and scissors. And for this sweater, you'll also want buttons. I used 4. You could use a different number if you like. It's totally up to you, and the instructions do provide for that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the finished Essential Baby Sweater. Here is the finished Essential Baby Sweater. This pattern is in 0 to 6 month size, so it should fit right up to about 6 months, or at least 6 month sizing based on the Craft Yarn Council's standard sizing instructions. Of course, babies come in all sizes, so this is a great baby shower size. Now, you can see it is pretty simple. If you're an experienced crocheter, you may recognize these are almost 100% half double crochet stitches. The only other stitches are some single crochets for the edging and a little bit of chaining, of course, for the loops and things where normally you would need to chain in a pattern. This pattern is made from the top down. So you start up here, you create the yoke, you join right here, and then you work across to make the body. I'll be demonstrating all of that here shortly, so if that was confusing, don't worry about it. Then you come back afterwards and add each of the sleeves, finishing up with the cuff, and then we come back around and add our final edging, which is where we add our button loops right here. Now in the instructions, I've included the size of these buttons, 7/8 inch, and I found that a single crochet, chain 5, single crochet was a great button loop size for this, but I want to point out right away that if you use different sized buttons or maybe buttons with a little bit more shape, you may need to change that chain length to accommodate your button. So you'll want to check that before you make that button loop, or make a couple of them, try them on, and see if you need to pull back and make them bigger or smaller. So let's go ahead and get started making our Essential Baby Sweater. All right, so row 1 of the Essential Baby Sweater begins with a chain of 43, which I've already gone ahead and done here. Then we are going to half double crochet in the second chain from the hook. Now I like to work into the back hump of the chain. Normally you would work under the top 2 loops, but I really like to work in that back 3rd loop there behind the top 2. I find it gives a better finished edge for working the eventual edging into, but it's just a personal preference. So again, I'm going to yarn over, skip that first chain, and half double crochet in the chain after that. There we are. Then I'm going to half double crochet in the next 6 chains. So I'll yarn over and go into the next chain. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There we are. So at this point, we should have 7 half double crochets made. That first one, 1, and 6 more. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So then we are ready to make our first corner, and that is listed as a special stitch on this pattern. To make a corner, it's 3 half double crochets in the indicated stitch when you place, and then you place a stitch marker in the center or that second half double crochet. So let's go ahead and make a corner now. I'll go ahead and pull up a stitch marker, and then I'm going to put 3 half double crochets right in that next chain. So there's 1 and 2, whoops, there we go, and 3. And then as soon as I have finished that, I'm going to pick up my stitch marker and put it right in that second chain. And then as we continue the yoke or top of our sweater, we will maintain putting our corners right in that marked stitch. So that is a great visual cue as you zip along on this easy baby sweater. After we make our first corner, then you will need to half double crochet in the next 6 chains again. So let's find the next one here, and we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, let me try that again here. 4, there we go. 5 and 6. It's always a little fiddly working into the chains, but that's how most patterns begin, right? There we go. All right, so we've got our corner there, so we know that's not part of our count. Then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. After we've made that, that will actually be the top of our sleeve, and it's time to make another corner. So in the next chain, we do 3 more half double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Grab another stitch marker here. Put a stitch marker right in the second or center of those half double crochets. And then we're ready to work across the back, which is a half double crochet in the next 12 chains. Get that yarn back on there. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. There we go. And that creates the back of our sweater. You can see the shape is already starting to occur a little bit here. We've got the first half of the front, we've got the top of one shoulder, we've got across the back. Time for another corner. We're going to put 3 half double crochets right in the next stitch. So 1, 2, and 3. And of course, put our stitch marker right in the center one there. Oops. There we go. Then I'll need to pull up a little bit more yarn. And then it's time to make our second shoulder. So again, we're going to half double crochet in the next 6 stitches. Got too many yarn overs there. There we go. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There we are. And then, of course, time for our last corner. There will be 4. If you've got 5, you've got too many corners. If you've got 3, you don't have enough. So let's get these 3 half double crochets in this stitch right here. And then, of course, we can't forget to put our stitch marker in the center one. There we go. And then we're just going to half double crochet in each remaining chain, which should be 7. Remember, we had 7 before we made our first corner. We want the same number here. And this will be the second half, or the other front portion of our sweater when all is said and done. So I will just finish up this row here. And at the end of row 1, you should have a total of 50 stitches. However, when we get to that very last stitch, we're going to finish it with our color B. Right now I've been using color A, which for me was Aqua Sky, but of course you can use whatever color you like. Soft Essentials Baby comes in some gorgeous colors, and it coordinates beautifully with all the other Soft Essentials lines too, so you can mix it up and pick the ones you like best. So I did go ahead and finish that stitch, so I can put it down here for a second and pick up my color B. For color B, I used the white or cotton colorway of Soft Essentials Baby. And as you can see, I had quite a bit left after making that baby sweater, so it only takes a few yards of both color B and color C for this sweater. I've pulled up some length here, so let me find my end, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out that last stitch. Put that loop back on my hook, sort of set color B there, ready and waiting for me. Then I'll yarn over, go into that last stitch, pull up a loop, and then before I yarn over and pull through, that's where I want to switch to color B. This will give me a really nice clean color change for my stripe. So I'll just yarn over and pull that right on through like so. And then I can drop that end and start crocheting with color B. Now I want to leave color A attached so that I can pick it back up and I don't have to cut all these ends. So you would want to leave that attached and work it up along the side as best you can. So we're going to go ahead and start row 2 with the chain 1. And then we're going to half double crochet in each stitch until the marked stitch. Now if you follow the written pattern, there are numbers for this, but it really is as simple as that. Just half double crochet in each stitch until you get to that marked stitch. Right on across here. No front loop, back loop worries. Just go under both loops of each stitch with a standard half double crochet. One of the things I wanted to do with this pattern was create a really basic baby sweater that beginners could make and that more experienced crocheters could add their own special touch to. Just a great jumping off point for all those last minute baby showers and gifts you need. So we've half double crocheted across to our first stitch marker. In that first stitch marker, we're going to go ahead and work our next corner. So that's 3 half double crochets all in that same stitch. So 1, 2, and 3. And then we want to move that stitch marker on up to the center of those stitches, of course, so we can maintain our corner here. There we go. And then the same thing, just half double crochet in each stitch across until you get to the next stitch marker, make another corner, and repeat to the end. Like I said, the written pattern does have the exact numbers for that, so if you want to consult those, you absolutely can. At the end of row 2, you should have a total of 58 stitches, because if you think about it, we've increased by 2 in each of those corners. And we've got 4 corners, so that's 8 more stitches in round 2, or row 2, I should say. So here we are at our second stitch marker. I'll put my 3 stitches right in there. 1, 2, and 3. Like so. Move my stitch marker up. There we are. And I'll just continue as before. Half double crochet in each stitch till I get to the next stitch marker and on till I get to the end. So I'll see you when we get to the end of row 2. All right, now you can see I've come to the end of row 2. I've actually got 1 stitch left here to make. So before I make that stitch, I'm going to put my work down and pull up my color C. For color C, I used, let me look it up here so I say it right, the Blue Horizon colorway. And you can see that this ball hopefully is a little bit smaller than the white or the solid colors, and that's just not because I use so much more. I use the same amount of white and this color, basically, maybe a little bit more of this one, but the prints come in smaller balls. So if you wanted to do the main body of the sweater in a print, then you'll need to take that into account when you buy your yarn. So let me go ahead and pull an end up of this one here. There we are. Set that right there so it's ready for me, and then I will go ahead and finish up this last stitch of row 2. There we go. So of course, oops, I split the yarn just a little bit. Let me get that back on the hook. Pull up a loop, pull that up, and then I will yarn over and pull through with our color C to finish row 2. And again, I just want to leave the end of the white here attached and hanging out because I will come back and use this again. So after that, row 3 is exactly the same as row 2. Again, I've written it out with the exact numbers in the written pattern, but basically you half double crochet till you get to the stitch marker, make a corner in the marked stitch, move that stitch marker up to the center one, and keep on going on across. So at the end of row 3, you should have a total of 66 stitches. So I'll see you when we get to the end of row 3. All right, so here I am at the end of row 3 with 1 more stitch left to make, and I want to switch colors again, and I'm going to switch back to color A. So I'm going to go ahead and start that last stitch, stop with my 3 loops left on the hook, and then my color A, there we are, is hanging right out there on the end waiting for me. We left that attached so we wouldn't have any extra ends to weave in. So I'm just going to go ahead and yarn over with that and gently pull it on through to finish that stitch. Now you don't want to make this loop too tight or it's going to squinch down. It's going to pull this edge, and you don't want to make it too loose. You don't want it hanging out there and end up with a loose stitch. So you need to just kind of wiggle it back and forth on your hook like this until you can feel it's nice and smooth along the side there. Not too much tension and not too little. Just kind of give it a wiggle back and forth and you should be able to tell when it wants to sit there really nicely. Then after that, it's just the same thing for rows 4, 5, and 6. Go across with color A. Make sure to put your corners in the marked stitches. Change to the next color to come back the other way. This time you'll change to the color B, which is white, right there waiting for you at the end. And then come back across with that one And then of course our color C, where is it? There we go. Our color C is waiting back at this end to be used again. So for 4, 5, and 6, we just run through the same thing. Color A, color B, color C, continuing to make our corners. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and skip to row 7. After you have finished rows 5 and 6, you can go ahead and cut yarns B and C. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now so that my yarn doesn't get all tangled up. So I will set aside color C. And on the other end here, we should have color A, or excuse me, color B. So I'll cut that one. So I still only have color A attached. And that's what I'm going to use until I get nearly to the bottom of the sweater. So let's go ahead and jump to the instructions for row 7. With color A, I'm going to chain 1 and half double crochet across to that first marked stitch again, just like we were doing before. At this point, if you want to work over some of those ends, you could, or you can, well, you should definitely still weave them in. Don't just work over them. Especially with a yarn like this, it's 100% acrylic, it's a little slicker. You definitely need to weave in those ends. If you just work over them, they will almost certainly eventually come out. And of course, baby items get washed a lot, so you want to make sure those ends are woven in really, really well. So if you're following the written pattern, you should have 13 stitches before you get to that first marked stitch. And then we are just going to put 1 half double crochet in that marked stitch. And we can go ahead and take that stitch marker out. What we're going to be doing now is creating essentially the armpit of the armholes. So what we need to do is chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we're going to skip to the next marked stitch, skip all those stitches in between. That's going to be the top of our sleeve. And we're going to put a half double crochet in the second marked stitch, like so. So we'll go ahead and take that stitch marker out and set it aside. We're done with that for now. And then continue to half double crochet across until we get to the third marked stitch. If you are following the written instructions, then you should have, let's see, a half double crochet in the next 24 stitches here until you get to the next marked stitch. So after that chain, you'll have a total of 26 stitches here. Of course, I don't have quite as many because I didn't make rows 4, 5, and 6 of our yoke, but that's okay. Just half double crochet on across till you get to that third marked stitch. You can see even by skipping a few rows, I've still got quite a few stitches here. I'm almost there though. I can feel the stitch marker in my hand coming at me. So we'll continue to work our way across here. This is again creating the back of our sweater. So we want to come over here until we are ready to make our second sleeve. So I've got it right here. Just half double crochet across. If you're not familiar with the half double crochet stitch, I do have a separate tutorial for that. So here we are at our third marked stitch. So I'm going to put a half double crochet in that third marked stitch. I'll go ahead and remove that stitch marker, get it out of the way. And then again, I'm going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I am going to half double crochet in the next marked stitch, skipping all the stitches in between. There we are. I can go ahead and remove that stitch marker. Obviously need to pull up a little bit more yarn here. It's creeping in on me. There we go. All right. And then we can just half double crochet in each stitch to the end. So let me do that here, and then I will show you what we've got as soon as I've got that finished. All right, so I've just finished my last stitch of essentially row 7. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull that up and take my hook out so I can show you what we've got. We've got our half double crochets, a chain 5, our half double crochets, a chain 5, and our half double crochets. When I flip this over like so that our chains are down here, and I close it up, you can see, hopefully, if I move all these ends out of the way, all these pesky ends, I'm going to go ahead, in fact, and just trim those off. This isn't our full-size baby sweater. It's not going to become a real baby sweater, so I'm just going to cut these off out of our way so they don't impact what we see. There we go. So if I tuck those aside, you can see we have the front of our sweater, the front opening. We have our sleeve openings now. These will be basically down the armpits. I know it's not a very elegant name for it, but that's what they are. These make up the armpits, and up here is our neckline. So if we get our loop back on the hook, we are now in the trunk or midsection of the sweater. Starting with row 8, we're going to chain 1 and just half double crochet in each stitch and chain across. Now, a lot of people debate about, do you crochet into the chain or do you crochet into the chain space? And I really am a firm believer that it depends on the pattern. Some work better with one, some work better with the other. For this type of particular pattern, I strongly recommend that you half double crochet in each individual chain. Yes, it takes a little bit more time. It's a little bit fiddlier, but the end result will be much, much better in your finished sweater. You really want those stitches stable and spaced out right where they should be. So let me pull up a little bit more yarn here because I've gotten to where my chains are. So I'm just going to go into each of these stitches as if it was any other stitch. Now, in this case, I'm not going to try and work into that bottom hump because we have a set direction on these chains. We want to go ahead and work under those top 2 loops. But luckily, only 5 at a time. Just make sure you get in each one of those chains with a half double crochet. So at the end of row 8, you should have a total of 64 stitches. Let me get these last 2 here so you can get an idea of how this is coming together. There we are. And I'll just maybe one more here so you can see a little better. There we go. So I'm just going to half double crochet all the way across, working into those chains. These stay unworked for now. Like I said, this is going to be our armhole. So we want to leave that alone and just half double crochet all the way across. Now, rows 9 through 17 are the exact same thing, except we don't have any chains to work into. We just work back and forth across in half double crochet rows. So at the end of row 18, then you will switch, at the end of row 17, that's when you switch to color B, work even again, switch to color C, work even again, and finally switch back to color A and work even again to create the stripes at the bottom of our sweater. Let's take another quick look at those. Okay, here we have our finished baby sweater again, and these are the stripes I'm referring to. We're just working even here. If I flip this over, in fact, let's go ahead and open it up as if we were crocheting it. Get these button loops off here. There we go. All right, so we've been crocheting this way back and forth. Remember, we work across those armpits. If I pull it out the finished sweater here, see that would have been right along here. We're just working back and forth in rows, and then we change colors very simply, just working as we did before, but of course we don't even have any increases. We're just working evenly to the bottom of the sweater. When we have finished row 20, which would be this row right here, we're going to go ahead and break the yarn and add our sleeves. The remainder of the blue that you see here is added on in the buttonholes and final edging section. So let's go ahead and move to the sleeves. All right, now we're going to make the sleeves for our essential baby sweater. What you want to do is find the center stitch of the armpit. Remember we made those 5 chains? You want to find that unworked back hump there of the very center of those chains. I'm going to go ahead and take my color A and join with a slip stitch right in that stitch. So I'll pull that loop through. I like to flip the tail over to sort of lock it into that stitch a little bit if I can here. And then I will give a chain 1. And then I'm going to half double crochet 27 stitches total evenly around this arm opening. Now obviously you've got all these chains down here in the armpit to work into, so that's 5 of them. And then you have the 18 stitches that you skipped when you did your chain 5. So that makes 23, so there's 4 more stitches, and these are kind of optional. I like to add them, some people don't. Some people would say, no, you need to go straight from this over here to this first stitch over here, maybe that's unworked. I like to put a couple more in here simply because I feel like this creates gaps at the armhole if you don't. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of stick one right in here. So that's 1 extra stitch along the side, so to speak. And then another one right here. And let's see. Nope, that's too much of a gap. I'm going to move that one back a little bit. So I'll go ahead and put that one right in the side of that row. Right, like so. Then I want to just continue working in each of these stitches. There should be 18 that you skipped or so. Again, if you need to add an extra stitch to make this work, the stitch count itself is not really important. You just want a really even, good looking sleeve. So if you need to add an extra stitch or eliminate a stitch, it's not going to matter too much. You just want to be real close because of course you don't want your sleeves to be too small. So we're just going to continue half double crocheting really evenly right along that sleeve opening until we get to the other side, and then we'll join. So I will see you when we get to that point. All right, so I've crocheted row 1 of my sleeve, and I haven't yet joined because I wanted to point out that this is another great opportunity to use your stitch markers to help you out. I'm going to put a stitch marker in the very last stitch of this row, or round rather, that I just made. And I'm also going to put one into the very first stitch that I made. And this will help me keep track because we are going to work the sleeves in turned, I always have to stop and think about this one. Turned rows or joined, no wait. Turned rounds or joined rows. See, I always get it wrong, but basically what it means, we're working in rows, we're going to join, but instead of chaining one and working the same direction again, we're going to turn and work from the inside of the sleeve for our even numbered rows. So let me go ahead and make this slip stitch here, right to that very first stitch. And the reason that we like to use our stitch markers here is it will prevent us from not working into this first stitch and from working into this slip stitch. It really just helps us keep our rows very even. Or rounds rather. So I'll go ahead and chain 1 and then turn for round 2 to work from the inside of the sleeve. So for round 2, just like rounds 3 through 14, all going to be the same. We chain 1, we half double crochet in the first stitch. This is where that marker comes in handy. Looks like that's the first stitch. It's not. That's the slip stitch. So we want to come over here and make our first stitch of this round. Pull it through here. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and move that stitch marker on up to this stitch. Now we know this is the first stitch of this round. So I can continue to half double crochet around until one stitch remains, and that'll be that marked stitch. So I will see you when we get to the marked stitch for round 2 of the sleeve. All right, so here I am at the end of round 2 of our sleeves, and you can see I've got one stitch left unworked. It is the marked stitch, which came in handy. I know exactly where I am. So what I want to do is skip this marked stitch altogether and just slip stitch right in the first stitch I made. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead though and take that stitch marker out and put it in this stitch so that I know this is the new last stitch of this round. And when I turn and come back the other way, it'll be the first stitch. So now I can go ahead, slip stitch to that marked stitch. Don't move that stitch marker out. We want to leave it. We're not going to work into it right away because remember, we're going to chain 1 and turn. Same thing again, half double crochet in that first stitch, which the stitch marker will tell us it is. There we are. Then we can move that stitch marker on up to the top of that stitch and continue with round 3, just as we did for round 2. When we come to here and we've got that last marked stitch, move that stitch marker up, skip that stitch, and join to the first one. So we're going to continue doing all our sleeve rounds exactly the same way until we have made a total of 14 rounds for the sleeve. Now, rounds 15 and 16, we will stop decreasing. So for rounds 15 and 16, first of all, you're going to work in that marked stitch. Don't skip it. But also for rounds 15 and 16, if I pull up the finished sweater here, you can see that's where we're adding our stripes. So we work through round 14, and if I pull up the sweater a little bit more here, you can see by skipping that last stitch, we get a great little tapered decrease for our sleeve. So it's a little bit more fitted than most baby sweaters. When we get here down here for round 15 and 16, and then finally round 17, we're just adding more stripes. And at this point, we're also working even. We're not decreasing anymore. So at the end of round 17, you will have finished one sleeve. And then, of course, you'll need to come over and do the same exact thing on the other sleeve. Now, the reason we worked in turned rounds is a couple of reasons. First of all, it keeps the great same look that we got on the body of the sweater. Half double crochet stitches create this line on the back of the stitch, and we would lose that if we kept working in rounds without turning. The other reason to turn the round is that it keeps the seam really straight right in the center of that sleeve, right in the underneath, right in the armpit there. Rather than working in the same direction, that's when you get a slant, and that's when the seam starts showing. So by turning, we've kept that right at the bottom of the sleeve where it will show the least. So now we're ready to talk about the buttonholes and final edging. Okay, so coming back to our finished sweater here, we have finished everything except for this final edging and these button loops, and of course sewing on our buttons. So what I recommend you do at this point, before you've added the edging, is that, let me kind of hide those underneath here, you basically want to take your buttons and sort of line them up where you want them to be, where you want them to line on the sweater. Now I put the buttons on this side. This is because I designed it as a boy sweater. If you wanted to make it for a girl's sweater, strictly speaking, the buttons should be on the other side with the button loops on this side. Very easy to do. You can do either one in the pattern. You can change the number of buttons. You can use differently sized buttons, whatever works for you. Just make sure if you do use differently sized or particularly shaped buttons that you make sure that button loop is big enough for it. So after you've sort of figured out the placement of all your buttons, then I recommend you take stitch markers, and on the opposite side, so on this side, sort of tuck those back, I would have put the stitch markers right there. And of course at the time it would have been a raw edge, not a finished edge. But I would just put those stitch markers directly across so that I knew where I wanted my button loops to be. Then I went ahead and set my buttons aside and added the button loops before I sewed the buttons on, just to make sure they lined up just right. So after you've placed those stitch markers, then what you're going to do is come to the back of the neckline right here, right at the top of the sweater, and use your hook and your color A to go ahead and join and chain one and simply start single crocheting across the top of the neckline. I'm assuming you know how to single crochet, so you just single crochet in each stitch right across. And actually, of course, this would be the opposite side of the foundation chain. So that's where it's really nice to have left those two loops unworked, because that's where you can work into right here. So this is round one of the border right here that I'm pointing at right here, not the second round, but this one right here. You work all the way across the top of that neckline. When you get right here to the top of your front flap, you're going to chain two, and then instead of single crocheting into the raw edge here, if I kind of push that one down a little bit, what you actually want to do is slip stitch right along this front edge, and just slip stitch as evenly as you can. I do have a separate tutorial for working to the edge that I'm going to link out here. You can do that, of course, when you're working to the edge with any kind of stitch, but right along the front we want to work slip stitches. And the reason we do that is because if you look closely, we can't even really see them, but it's going to give us a really nice finished edge when we come around again and make these button loops. So slip stitch all the way across this front edge until you get down here to this corner, then chain two again. And then of course, single crochet, because we've got a nice finished edge here. So we want to single crochet right across that bottom row, that last row we made on the body, chain two again, and then slip stitch again right along this front panel until we get to the top, chain two, and then we can just single crochet in each remaining stitch of the neckline until we join here somewhere in the center. It doesn't have to be the exact center stitch. It's just a matter of hiding it sort of behind the neck. So wherever you want to start is fine. For round two of the border edging, you're just going to chain one and single crochet again until you get to that chain two space in the corner, where you're going to work a single crochet, chain two, single crochet right back into that chain two space. You can see that's happening right there. Then we're ready to start single crocheting into those slip stitches and making our button loops. So you single crochet in each slip stitch until you get to where you've put your stitch marker. So you can see I've got a couple stitch markers down here. I would have had a couple stitch markers here. And when you make that slip stitch row, it's fine to go ahead and move that stitch marker up to the slip stitch that you would have made right above it, so you can double check your placement and just make sure that they're exactly where you want them to be. So then when you get to that marked stitch, like down here, what you would do is work a single crochet and then a chain five and a single crochet right back into that marked stitch. This creates the button loop, and this is where you may need to expand or indeed perhaps contract the size of your button loop depending on the size of your button and indeed the size of your gauge. If you chain a lot tighter than I, you might need a couple more chains for the same size button. So be sure to try those on your buttons. You know, take a couple more stitches so it's good and anchored down, and then try it on your buttons to make sure it's the right size. Then just single crochet, in each stitch till you get to that next marked stitch, make your next buttonhole, single crochet till you get near your next marked stitch, make your buttonhole, etc., all the way till you get down to that next corner in that chain two space. You've got it. Single crochet, chain two, single crochet, on across, single crochet, chain two, single crochet in that corner, and then simply single crochet along this edge. We don't need to do any special crocheting for the button side. Now, as I said, if you were making the girls version and you wanted to flip these, then you would simply work evenly along this side and put your buttonholes on this side. Same thing, same technique. It's just a matter of where you want to put those button loops. Other than that, when you get all the way around then for round two, and you've worked your way all the way back up to that neckline and single crocheted in the remaining neck stitches, you simply join to that first stitch, finish it off, and boom, you've got your finished sweater. Well, I take that back. One more step, you're going to need to sew on those buttons. Now, you can see here, I have attached these buttons using yarn, not thread. Now, you can use matching thread if you prefer. I like to use yarn. Now, in situations like this where the buttonhole would be too small for my typical yarn needle to fit through, you can use dental floss to pull the yarn right through those buttonholes. And then once they're pulled through, of course, you can just sew them right onto your project. I do, again, have a separate tutorial for this linked at the link in the description. It's a really great technique for adding all sorts of buttons. Really lets you use your yarn. You don't have to worry about the thread being too sharp for the yarn or anything like that. It's just a really handy technique, so you'll have to check that out on its own tutorial. And that's how you make the Essential Baby Sweater. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments. This is a very simple baby pattern, perfect for beginners, and for experienced crocheters, take that stitch multiple and have some fun with it down here. You can add all sorts of personal touches. And of course, personal touches with buttons too. It's another great way to adapt this baby sweater and really make it your own. Thank you so much for watching. Happy crocheting, and don't forget to go to the link in the description for all the goodies as well as the written pattern.